Hello again. So I wanted to finish off my wee series about belief with two more videos. The next and the final one will be about the notion of scripture and the Gospels and the like. And this one is about actually the most difficult barrier that most people find to a belief in God, which is the notion of the problem of evil. It's the most emotive of all the arguments against God, and it's one very popular with the new atheists like Richard Dawkins. And he really cranks up the rhetoric about this one, railing against the God that he doesn't believe in for causing evil, and angrily denouncing anybody who believes in that God as an enabler of the evil that the God he doesn't believe in causes. And yes, I find it a bit annoying, not because there isn't an answer to the problem of evil, or at least a decent response, but because the issue is complicated and that form of rhetoric isn't. We have in recent years just seen where angry rhetoric gets us, and it's not to a good place. There are responses we can make to a question of how and why a good God would permit suffering. But if you use that question as a battering ram, you're not looking for answers, you're looking for victory. But if we can ask that question from a truth-seeking, philosophical perspective, there are truthful responses that we can make, which, at least for me, make it possible to reconcile the idea of a world in which evil exists with a loving God. So let's lay out that problem in some decent detail. There is what's known as two parts of the problem of evil. One is what's called human evil, evil created by human beings being horrible to one another. Now, personally, I think that we need to take responsibility for our own actions. And if we cry to God, how can you let all this suffering happen in the world? Then God's probably likely to say to us, yes, I was going to ask you the same question. We have to be responsible for human evil just as much as anything else. But that shouldn't take away from the issue of evil, which is both from human evil and natural evil, which is volcanoes and tsunamis and the like. Why has God enabled a world in which suffering is part of the deal? If we look at the process of evolution, it seems that it's dependent on a certain amount of suffering. Some things not surviving, other things surviving. Some things having to survive by eating other things. It seems to be pain as part of the process. So why is that? I think there are answers to this question, but first of all, it's important to make a couple of points. Firstly, if we are to accept the answers, we have to accept that no answer we come across will take away our pain. Pain is part of the system, it's part of the universe, and whether God exists or not, it's something we're going to have to deal with. So no answers to the problem of evil will change that and make pain less. Secondly, pain and evil and suffering are not the same things. Pain is painful. That doesn't make it evil. If we just lump bad stuff together, then this is an argument about saying, well, God can't exist because I've got chilblains. God can't exist because I don't have everything I want as soon as I want it. Now, that's a different argument and not a very good one. But there is a decent argument to be made about the problem of evil, which is, to paraphrase Epicurus, either God cannot prevent evil or he will not. If he cannot prevent evil, he is not all powerful. If he will not, he is not all good. Well, let's respond to that with imagining a world without evil. Let's imagine a world where no human evil could happen, where no one could harm anyone else, where there was no death. Let's go for broke. Let's not just imagine that there was no death, but there was also no overpopulation, that there was no overcrowding. And forget not being able to have kids or anything like that. You can literally have anything you want. Imagine that world, a world with no pain whatsoever. If you fell off a cliff, you'd bounce. If you shot someone, they would not die. Where evolution happened in a different way so that there was never any pain involved. Because Dawkins and those guys seem to be saying that if God did actually exist, that would be the world we lived in. Can you picture that world? It's a nightmare. It's a horror story, is that world. It will be a world of no choices, no learning, no growth, no loss, nothing that makes us human could exist in that world. A world where the laws of physics made no sense, where gravity changed according to need, or biology changed in order for pain not to exist, would be a world where we could not learn anything. We would have no ability even to be inquisitive, and nothing would be fixed enough for us to enable experience or experiment. And a world where a punch or a violent word could not hurt is also a world where a hug or a kind word could not comfort. It's a Prozac world, where everything is in soft focus, where nothing matters, where nothing is really real. Above all, it will be a world where nothing that we did mattered. Can you imagine art or poetry or music in that world? Can you imagine Keats without melancholy? Can you imagine Shakespeare without loss? Can you imagine anything that makes us human surviving in that world? There would be a world without risk, and that would be a world without love. So when people say if God existed, then there would be no pain, that's like saying, well, if God existing, there would be no humanity. And ironically, if God is love, and that is the world that he would create if he existed, we're saying if God existed, there would be no God. Anything that makes us really human is in this world, the world of pain. Would we be prepared to surrender our humanity in order to live without pain? Well, I don't know, but sometimes we're in such pain that we just want God to turn the dial down a bit. We want to be in just a bit less pain, or a bit less anguish, a bit less hurt by the world. And I genuinely don't know why God doesn't do that. Maybe this is as good as it gets. Maybe this is as dialed down as he can make the pain for us to have free will and to be truly human, truly alive. Maybe with a bit less pain we'd be a bit less human, I don't know. But it's a fair request to get God to take the pain away. And I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of why that doesn't happen. And that's why in the Psalms or in Job or in the Gospels, we have faithful believers despairing of God because we simply don't understand why. But what I do know is that often those who have experienced the most pain, who have had the hardest lives, are often the most faithful. And it would be horrifically patronising to say that they're just doing it because they need the comfort. Only an atheist with no understanding of faith could think it's comforting to forgive your enemies. It really isn't. It takes a lot of effort. It takes more effort when you're in pain. But perhaps there is something about pain and suffering that makes us think clearer, that puts us in touch with God. You see, there is a further response to be made about the problem of evil. The main issue about the idea of the problem of evil is that it seems incompatible that God can be all good and all powerful if he permits evil. That paraphrase of Epicurus again. Either God will not prevent evil or cannot, because either he is not all powerful or he's not all good. But those are only two aspects of the all-loving God, the idea that God is all good and all powerful. But Christianity has had another two aspects of God, and you can't just take half of God and expect to see the whole picture. St. Augustine, again, who died in 350 AD, so this is, pretty orthodox Christianity, defined God as being all-loving, all-powerful, also all-seeing and all-present. Omnipresent meant more than simply God was in everything, in every atom. It meant that he was entirely present in every emotion and every consciousness. What we feel, he feels. What we suffer, he suffers. So the question is less, why does God let this happen to me? And more, why does God let this happen to him? Now you can say that's just fiddling with definitions, but that's the Christian definition of God for the last 1700 years, and it's the only one I'm defending. We have to stop thinking of God as the all-powerful figure sitting in the corner watching the kid getting beaten up by the bullies. He is the kid getting beaten up by the bullies. He is the ethnic minority child suffering the abuse. He's the gay child being taunted and abused. He's the man on the cross being killed for threatening power structures. You see, the real problem of evil is that it's only a philosophical problem when we are obsessed with a God of power rather than a God of love. When we're obsessed with a God who can do things for us rather than a God who loves everyone equally. Either God exists or he doesn't. It's a judgment call. But we know that suffering and pain and evil do exist in the world, and we know that without those things, love as we understand it could never flourish. Free will and autonomy as we understand it could not exist. Humanity could not exist without those things, and neither could the Christian God. I don't find the notion of pain incompatible with a God of truth and love. In fact, I think it would be impossible for a God of truth and love to give us anything less than what we have. We are presented with a world with the stabilizers taken off, with a real world. That is what God, if he exists, has given to us. If God exists, this is the world that he created. And on balance, I think he did.